think that did it. It took a long time to
It's
set that up.
yes.
But the sound is coming through here.
Yeah.
But then I'll be able to sync it up.
You should be able to sync it up.
Through
There
the
should be in Final. I know in Final Cut there's like an audio analyst where it will actually.
I can't use Final Cut, Henry. It's too sophisticated.
It's too sophisticated.
Yep. I mean, I was almost tempted just to put on wired mics just to make sure things are connected.
and a beta cam.
Yep. So let's make sure. Just gonna tweak it a little bit. I want to make sure you're okay. We're both here.
Okay.
So we're going back to Mattie's Diner.
We're going back to Mattie's
I'll have
Diner.
to-
You're going the wrong way, but that's okay.
Wow.
Just go down here to the street and turn left.
All right. To this street.
Yeah.
Live from Charlotte, North Carolina
Yes.
on Thanksgiving weekend. And I didn't know you'd be back in town, so this worked out.
Yeah, we only just actually it's so funny. We took Mom. We went into the wheelchair accessible van down here in Charlotte because we forgot to book them earlier, and this was the only place that had one. So we actually picked the wheelchair van up, drove it up to Winston-Salem, picked up Mom, drove back to our cousin's house in Concord.
Oh,
and then drove back to.
and that's
that
where we
night.
had Thanksgiving.
And then that's where we had Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Good. And you're off your cold, so that's why we couldn't have lunch
Yes,
this
I'm off
week.
my cold, thankfully. NyQuil does wonderful things. NyQuil, oh my God.
Lets you sleep.
It lets you sleep, and, it doesn't actually cure the cold. I think it just kind of, sleep long enough that the cold just kind of runs its natural course.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's probably something that young people would abuse.
Yes.
Is NyQuil.
Well, actually, it's the one thing that you could buy over the counter without having to go back to the pharmacist.
Like NyQuil and Red Bull or something.
I want to be drunk, but I don't want to sleep.
That's right. I have a cold. That's why I smell like NyQuil. So I should be able to turn left here.
Yes.
I didn't want to trust the car to get out of these spots. Okay, now we go. All right. So the reason I want to chat with you again is just to catch up, but also because you were supposed to be interviewed at the College of Architecture. They wanted you to do a presentation.
Yes.
And you declined.
I declined because I really didn't have enough time.
Right. Well, my suggestion was don't do a presentation, do a fireside chat, because then you really don't have to prepare.
Yes.
Because your experience and your ideas are already there. You just have to be
prompted to talk about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How long's it been since? So 94, 20 years?
30 years.
30 years.
Yes. Yeah, 2004.
That's why we didn't study engineering.
Yes, exactly.
30
years. Yes. Yeah.
And did they give you a topic for your presentation, or?
No, I just want to talk about how my career path and how I ended up in architecture.
Right.
Well, how I ended up in architecture, and then how I ended up in sort of technology side of architecture.
I mean, we've kind of talked about that from the standpoint of a non-traditional. I mean, you work on projects, but the thing is, you'd kind of gotten a early access to technology, and that gave you a way in.
Yeah, it did. I mean, one of the things that I don't think I ever realized in architecture school was how, architecture firms are small businesses, which means you have to wear a bunch of different little hats.
In small firms, you do
firms,
a little of everything.
You do a little bit of everything. So there's going to be one person that's an architect, but there's also, in charge of technology. And
right.
I ended up just sitting around one day because I didn't have anything to architecture to work on, and figured out that our plotter at the time had 2 rolls of paper, but we were going to use 1 roll. Right. Because the software didn't allow us to switch rolls. So I wrote a little script that allowed us to switch rolls of paper. And that's kind of how I became into the technology side. It's like, oh, well, hang on, can you fix this, or can you look at this? And
so it evolved.
It kind of evolved from there. Yeah.
From the standpoint of, and all architecture schools are different, and this is not meant to be a loaded question or anything, but the idea of what do you think architecture school was good at? Because these kinds of questions would come up, right?
Yeah, right.
If you're talking to kids who are, I don't know, 30 years your junior now. They're in their
Yes.
20s and we're in our 50s.
Yes.
So you're talking to kids now. What is architecture really good at? Architecture school good at preparing you for if statistically students don't graduate and go into the traditional practice of designing and etc.
Yeah, I think what it is good at is, well, it's always been good at problem solving, right? Problem defining and problem solving.
Right.
And that way of thinking about the world, thinking about how things go together, all the technical and social and economic forces, sort of defining that problem. That's actually really good at.
Okay.
And where's that applicable in other professions? Lots of them, I think. Everything, right?
You have it's the restriction of constraints or the creativity of constraints.
Yes.
Where you have a location, we call it the site, but it's really the location which has its own rules. You have financial restrictions. You have delivery and time restrictions. You have customer restrictions. There's rules about how buildings can be assembled and how they have to perform restrictions.
Yep.
So it seems like if you got an undergraduate degree in architecture, I don't know if they're in the this person in front of us. They're in the pull-off lane. Yeah, they're in the breakdown lane.
Just continuing on.
So if you got an undergraduate degree in architecture, what couldn't you apply that to? Like, is that you could fold that into a law degree, an economics degree?
I think you could fold it into a law degree, definitely, because there is so much of nuance in architecture. There's nuance in law.
It is subjective. Law is subjective. That's why two people are more arguing a certain idea and who's going to be correct. I'm taking the long way, so we'll have time to chat. We're going to go. So you could do an undergraduate degree.
You could do an undergraduate degree in architecture, but I don't think that would be a weird way to get a law degree because I don't think too many universities are offering a 4-year degree anymore. Everything's like a 5-year.
Everything's a 5-year degree.
Yeah, so it's a little long way to go to, for a law degree, but definitely you could do law. Business, because that doesn't. Business
architecture school really doesn't. It's the problem-solving part of it, and I agree with that.
Yeah.
But the business
part
kind of a sensitivity to business restrictions. I don't know that it has a deep appreciation for that, or maybe it wants you to think outside of the box a little bit.
And I don't know if that's a combination of where we were in school at the time, because
maybe things have changed in the last 30 years.
Maybe things have changed in 30 years, where they're more focused on that. But I think. We certainly didn't get a good glimpse into the business because otherwise, we would have been like, real estate agents because they make a lot more with a lot less liability and responsibility, or developers.
Right. If the money's good, if you do well, but it seems like if you stuff it up on one project, you could be done. You know what I mean? If you're a developer and you just get a little bit over your skis, or you're a real estate agent. There's a lot of people that aspire to do that. So I wonder if the money is really that good.
I don't think in real estate agent, the money is that good. I think a developer...
And you have to hustle.
Yeah. I think a developer... Well, the problem with developers is you're always playing with someone else's money.
Right.
Which is the same with architecture. You're playing with the client's
money. That's any public... business.
Yeah.
You're playing with the shareholders' money.
Yeah. It's a good question.
Is there anything for students now you would suggest, unless it's changed, to have an appreciation or an understanding of the constraints of business?
Yeah, it's almost like you would really want to take a what is it? The auxiliary or executive education on a business development.
They've got the school
development class.
What is the School of Business?
Yeah, Belk School of Business.
Yep.
Yeah, you almost want to take a class in there on just a crash course on development, because that's something that you don't really understand until you. At least I didn't understand until years into the profession. and it's something that would have been useful because that is the economic forces that are kind of constraining you on design, and understanding why a developer, why does it matter for a developer to be, if they're building an apartment complex, to be able to get 4 more units in.
Right.
If you understand how the performer goes together, those 4 units, that could be...
That might, 4 units out of, 40? That's 10% of your project. That could make or break the project.
That could make or break the project, yes. Yeah.
It seems like economics is often regarded as a kind of a moral dilemma, as if money is bad and it's kind of a necessary thing that we have to deal with in architecture, but it's somehow tainted. And I'm kind of an advocacy that if you don't believe in ethical wealth, or you don't believe in ethical improvement through good stewardship of money, it's going to kind of evade you. As an architect, if you don't believe that money can be used for good and necessary, as let's call money kind of concentrated energy or concentrated knowledge, and what you do with that concentrated energy, you can do useful things with it that are long-sighted, long-termed,
yes,
or you can do short-sighted things with it.
Yeah.
So, I don't know that the College of Architecture, it's constrained about how much business experience you have to have, but it's going to frame a lot of what you do.
It frames how you work with your clients.
How you hire people.
It's all of that. And particularly in the commercial world, unless you're understanding how, unless you can think like a developer.
Like where the money comes from.
And
if if a project breaks, if it's not successful, how long it might take for the client to just break even again. How many more, let's say their margins are 20%.
Yeah.
And they have $1 million project, or a $5 million. So for 20% out of $5 million, $5 million project, they're going to generate $1 million in revenue.
Right.
But if they go under a project, or if they go over budget, $1 million, they've got to generate another $5 million just to break even on the loss.
Yeah, exactly.
And if you're not an architect that has a sense of urgency about that, or a sense of respect or understanding, or why is a client going to trust you with risking?
Yeah, exactly.
Their money.
Yeah, and that or you're going to be sort of relegated to their decision making, and not necessarily making the it's always a compromise when you're making decisions. There's economic forces, the design forces, and you're always listening to if you don't understand from the developer's perspective, then you're going to have to yield to whatever their decision is, and their decision may not be the one that actually looks at design as well, and there may be a compromise in between there, between what the developer wants and what you think architecturally is appropriate.
Is a good architect someone that can work within those economic forces and come up with not just viable solutions or minimal viable solutions, but really elegant solutions to kind of conforming to the rules of economic forces?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You guys have certainly, I would think, Shook is exemplary in that, from that standpoint, because they seem to take on the totality of the design. It's not just about the building, it's also about the branding, it's also about, it almost comes down to the flatware. You guys just do
it comes
everything.
Down, that's part of what, when you're designing restaurants, you're looking at the whole experience part of it.
Right.
So it's just not the architecture, it's just not the, how you're laying out the kitchen, or the, seating capacity of the dining room.
It's not just function.
It's, about the whole experience.
Right.
And what you can bring to that, because dining is as much about the food. You eat as much with your eyes as you do with your nose and mouth. So that whole experience
Look,
matters.
The auditory thing, the reason I don't like to go out to eat, it's hard to find a restaurant where you can just have a quiet conversation.
Yes.
There's usually so much activity, and there's so much auditory, not just noise in the literal sense, but just like background chatter.
Yeah.
That it's, I feel like I'm one of those guys going, can you turn down the music?
But, the background
But
music.
you have to think about all of that experience.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's not enjoyable. The food could be great, but the experience is bad, so you don't go back.
Yeah, exactly.
So from the standpoint of architecture school, an emphasis on understanding economic constraints.
Yeah.
Where does the technology play a role in this? Like, it seems that, at least with the schools that I've worked with, there's it's sort of dealt with in pejorative terms that the technology is like, well, we don't teach you to use tools, we teach you to think. But then how are you seeing students come out of school? Should they have an appreciation? Should they have a deep grounding? Or are you guys willing to take on that?
Well, so the thing that we're actually finding now is that the students that are coming out of school, they are well versed in the technology. And it's because they're digital native, right? They've grown up completely on the computers. When we were going to school in the 90s, we were at that transition in architecture where we're going from hand drafting to computer drafting.
Right.
Where now they're digitally native. The problem that we always have with them is really the constructability and the construction knowledge. That a lot of them just don't understand. Some of it's the developer, and why a developer would choose something.
Do you mean the detail of the construction,
but
or actually how you assemble the instructions?
How you would assemble the well, yes, two things. How you assemble the instructions, like how you would go, how you would assemble, how you actually start to construct something.
Right.
They do have a sort of a good sense of how buildings go together.
Right.
But like sequencing, or like you're going to design something that can't actually be built that way, or something that's going to cost you a lot more to, if you're trying to build it that way, it's going to cost you a lot more. That we run into. And then actually how the documentation goes together, which is interesting because documentation hasn't changed. It's still 2D drawings.
2D, yep.
On paper. We'll eventually, we'll send them a 3D model of it, but that's not the record drawings. That's not what's part of the legal contract.
Right.
So understanding how the documentation goes together, how you lay out a sheet, where you only put information one time on the sheet. You don't want to put it twice.
Right.
Because it could be out of sync, or, and then you run into problems. Even things like abbreviations, like, we had one person, they had put they're doing a finish plan, and they had, the paints were all numbered P and then a number.
Right.
And then the carpet, they put CT and a number. And actually they put C and a number instead of calling it out as carpet and a number. And the painter, when they got there, they thought that C meant ceiling. So they painted the ceiling, and the ceiling wasn't supposed to be painted. So you have like little things like that just kind of, the documentation can kind of get, weird. And that's one of the things that we have to constantly go back and check. And it's time consuming to sort of go back and check through that. So it's all kind of these interesting things on how you, how they know about documentation. That part is always I think our biggest challenge. The technology is actually, they're faster in the technology than I am.
Right. Is there something, what would you, if you were to tweak where we were and say, okay, well, we should have spent a little more time on the business ideas and the business constraints.
Yeah.
What do you think, looking back, was not really mission critical for the business of architecture?
That we studied in school that wasn't really that important? We did 2 years of history.
Right.
Actually, history matters because it helps you understand the context.
Context is, yeah.
Yeah, it helps you understand where it fits in the chronological order. History is kind of important.
I don't know if it takes 4 years. If you were really diligent and you wanted to learn the rules of the business and the rules of the profession, does it take 4 or 5 years? mind you, I was coming back as a student I was coming in with a prior degree, so I was just focused on studio, and I was working as well.
Yeah.
And whereas, if you're an undergraduate student, you've got all these other classes that you have to take to fulfill your...
Yeah, I don't think... does it take 4 years to learn to be an architect? I think it takes longer. I think if you were...
It does. Yeah.
It takes longer.
It's a life. It takes a life to figure it out.
It's definitely something that I would say if you were... it takes longer. It's longer than 4 years.
You can't graduate and just start your own business.
No, it's not something... No, I don't think you could do that. Although, honestly, I'm of the opinion for the licensing part of it...
Right.
That you should just be able to take the exam. And if you pass the exam, you're licensed. Because really the licensing part is really about, life safety and the protection of property.
Right.
And
it's a minimum of care.
It's a minimum of care. It's not, it's not about trying to design great buildings that fit in an environment and, work in the context and, have... No, it's about, not creating a death trap. And I think, that's at the bare minimum. So, yeah, you should just be able to take the exam. 18 years old, you take the exam. If you pass, you pass.
And now you can perform in terms of the minimum viable care.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's, and I don't want to take this to a kind of illogical extreme, but there's an enormity of time spent on trying to create things that are highly aspirational. And you're emotionally connected to the design.
Mm-hmm.
And then you get out, and the practice of architecture is often kind of deeply functional, or it's not always highly inspirational. It's solving problems of retail interiors, restaurants,
toilet
partition. It's pedestrian.
It's toilet, toilet renovations.
Yeah. Are we kind of setting kids up for frustration by creating an environment when they're very detached, if that's how it is now?
I think,
and very aspirational.
I think you have to have some aspirational aspect parts of it of school, because it has otherwise,
to carry you through,
to give you. To let you explore a little bit more that's not going to be, that you're not going to be able to do in a, in a professional environment. Like, You're never going to design a museum as an architect.
You might,
but it's very few architects.
But as a specialty.
But it's a specialty. It's going to go to the star architects. It's going to go to big name firms. You may or may never in your career be able to work on a museum.
Right.
But it's good to design in school, right?
Cars making noise at me because I got too close to the curb.
The curb came in on you.
The curb moved over.
Yes. So I think it's good, but I think there needs to be a lot more practical stuff as well in architecture. Like I remember in school, it was actually the structures professor. As part of it, he has to design a fire station, and that was actually like a very good, practical, technical project
of problem solving.
Yeah.
I don't know that we're taught to find beauty in the mundane, like the idea of does anyone aspire to design convenience stores? But I've been to Japan, and their convenience stores are like surgical theaters.
Yes, it's
they
amazing.
are amazing.
Yes.
And I don't know that we were ever given this idea that mundane things, common things, drugstores. I love old buildings from that standpoint when you walk in them and they have all of this elegant detail and careful proportion, and you go, oh, this was just an old drugstore. North Carolina is full of these small towns with these kinds of simple buildings.
Well, I remember, and God rest his soul, Kingston Heath, our architecture professor, I remember when we got to the last, semester of architecture, of history, and he was, was supposed to be 20th century American architecture.
Right.
And we never got to the 20th century. We were always stuck right there around the turn of the century.
Well, that's the bit he liked. Yeah.
That's the bit he liked. And it was kind of disappointing because, I remember we did do a little bit. I remember we covered one section on roadside architecture. And that was absolutely fascinating to me because it was like McDonald's and Howard Johnson hotels. And why does it have why does Howard Johnson have an orange roof? Because you can see it in the distance.
Yeah.
When you're traveling down the highway, you're tired, and before you could, for GPS and maps and everything, you needed to know where you could, sleep for the night. And that was always fascinating to me, where it kind of got lost in there. But there's some beauty in the thoughts of these trouble with that word. Mundane things that that kind of are important.
Yeah, the way that architecture changed with the advent of the automobile.
Yes, exactly.
McDonald's signs, apparently that yellow in the M is designed, the color cuts through fog, or it cuts through low light conditions. Yes. And I know from the highway, you can see that yellow M.
Yeah, exactly.
From an enormous distance. You're miles away, but that M is there, and you know what it is.
Yes.
But having to design around the function of automobiles, that we have drive-through banks, we have drive-through food, we have drive-through pharmacy.
Yeah.
And it'll change, but it's this. I don't want to say that all mundane things should be celebrated as high art. Certainly, that's what modern art did, right? With Warhol soup cans. And things.
Yes, yeah.
But if you can't appreciate or find some beauty in the mundane, you're going to struggle as a designer. It's going to be hard to sustain yourself.
Yeah.
In common things.
Yes.
And if you can add beauty or add elegance and find ways to celebrate the human experience in the mundane things, how someone goes to school, how someone goes to a library or buys groceries.
Yeah.
I mean, we spend an enormity of time doing those things where we have to go into buildings in order to sustain ourselves. And I found myself even gravitating away from and towards environments that feel good. Like, I prefer to go to Harris Teeter as a grocery store.
Yes.
And I know it's shoppertainment. Yes. But I don't know. I just like the proportions. I like the way you're led through the store. And once you get used to that and you go into a different store, you're like, oh, something's missing.
Yeah, something's missing here. Yes. Harris Teeter has a very large and elaborate decor package that, goes into the stores. Like if you go to, Harris Teeter versus a Food Lion, right?
Right.
Food Lion is very minimum on their, signage and decor. It's, enough to get you around.
It's very transactional.
But
they'll tell you where things are.
Yes.
The font doesn't have a lot of swirly script.
Yes.
It's just...
Yeah. They're not going to have a lot of, the displays are going to be, value oriented, not, a celebration of, discover this new food, discover this new thing here. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, there aren't a lot of, where Harris Teeter would have an in-house bakery.
They'll
have,
or they'll have
an in-house wine shop.
Yeah, they'll have a nice cheese display, right?
Right.
Like here's some new cheeses from New York. Okay.
Man, Charlotte is still building. I can't believe all this stuff is new.
Yes, no, there's. I can't remember how many units we added last year.
This is just all around. We're driving around South End. That's the Thirsty Beaver. Yes. They wouldn't give up their spot.
Yes.
It's been there forever. Is there anything? So for a young student that aspires to go to architecture school, what shouldn't they do to go to architecture school?
What shouldn't they do?
That seems important. Like, have an appreciation for these kinds of things.
So math plays a lot less of a role than I thought it would.
Okay. So don't stress out about...
Don't stress out about math.
Right.
If you can, if you can get through algebra, you're going to be fine.
Algebra, geometry, trigonometry.
Yeah, I mean, really, architecture is more applied geometry than anything else.
The structures class with Charlie, I just sped through that, and at the end of the day, there's just some rules of thumbs that you could use to guide yourself with regard to structure depth. But then you have somebody else who's dedicated their life to it.
Yeah, who's going to check that out and, tell you that, no. Having a good engineer as a friend is a wonderful thing.
So you just pick up the phone?
You pick up the phone. I remember I was doing a small renovation, and we needed to put a water heater on top of a room. And I was like, picked up the phone, called him. I was like, I've got spanning about 10 feet on, 2x6s, 16 inches. He's like, yeah, you can hold a water heater on top of that.
Okay.
Yeah, great. Problem solved. I'm moving on to the
And
next
you're not
system.
sending him drawings and getting him to draw or her to draw things up and then get a response back. It's just a quick rule of thumb.
It's a quick rule of thumb. He's like, yeah, this is good. And then, you're moving on to the next question.
Right.
The next, design problem you got to solve for. So, yeah, there's just wonderful things about having a good engineer that you can pick up the phone and call.
Right.
Early on in the design phase. Even if you're going to send something over to them later, just so you know.
Well, yeah, but you're not sending them something
that
doesn't
make sense, and then you've got to go back and redesign it.
Right.
Because one of the things that more experienced architects, older architects can do, that younger architects do, we get to the wrong answers quickly, or we know where the wrong answers are just from experience.
When you're trying to fit the pieces together.
Trying to fit the pieces together, we're kind of quicker on that. And getting to the narrowing the possibilities down to the ones that are feasible.
Right.
So
where the constraints overlap.
Yeah.
And there's your Venn diagram where, hey, look, here's your possibilities.
Yes.
Don't venture too far out of this.
Yeah.
Overlapping circle.
Yes. I remember one of the first things I was doing in school and profession was I was laying out the vinyl tile floor plans for a school.
Right.
And I remember, I came up with like these really intricate, like almost mosaic stuff that we were trying to do out of VCT. And I remember my manager at the time going like, no, you can cut it in half, you can cut it on a diagonal. That's all you've got to be able to do.
You're not breaking it into small pieces.
You're not breaking it into small pieces. You're not cutting triangles out of it. They're going to cut it in half, or they're going to cut it on a diagonal.
That's it.
That's it.
Now be creative.
Now be creative within that. And that was actually helpful because you've got the constraints that you've got to work within.
That is one thing about school that I don't know if I felt. Well, I felt frustrated by the kind of do anything assignment, do whatever you want assignment.
Yes.
And half of my day was spent working in an engineering firm, and the other half was, just do anything. And I think I perform better when I have constraints. It was like, okay, these are your materials. This is your... I think it was only Nelson that gave us a budget in terms of time. This is a 4-hour task. I want to see what you get at the end of 4 hours. Or this is the end of 8 hours. I want 2 options.
Yes.
And it was the time constraint that I felt was freeing. Because if you just do architecture at the expense of everything else, it gets to be horrible.
Yeah. One of my best professors, Deb Ryan, she was sitting there and I was throwing out all these like 10,000 ideas. She's like, just pick 2 of them and go with it.
Right.
They're all fine. You've got good ideas. Just pick one and go with it.
Go deeper.
Go deeper on that one. Otherwise you're just kind of sitting there spinning your wheels.
What about the idea of precedence? Should students... Is there a proper use of precedence, or where do you run the risk of just not ever trying to come up with your own ideas or your own kind of consideration of things?
Well, it goes back to what we were talking about precedence. You have to understand what the precedence created, right? Like if you were talking about like we were talking about the McDonald's sign and why that yellow breaks through. Okay, once you understand that, then you can play with that idea. You can break that idea. You can say that's no longer valid, but once you understand the context of it and the rationale behind design decisions, I mean, I look at everything.
It's one thing that I don't know that architecture school did a good job of, and that was my experience. Was here's a set of rules. Learn these rules really deeply. Like there was always the pattern language kind of approach.
Yeah,
but there certainly wasn't a kind of approach, I would say more classical architecture, where you had deeply embedded rules and you learn the rules such that you're capable of breaking them and breaking them well. It seemed like architecture school was all about breaking the rules, but you never really learned the rules. It was all about kind of abstract form making without, at least maybe that's just first year, that sort of Beaux Arts tradition or Bauhaus tradition of let's make shapes, let's make paintings, let's create mosaics, and these eventually inform us in terms of form and space. But it's kind of it was so abstract, where what I was expecting was a more technical approach of, here's the rules of crafting your product, and here's the rules of how buildings can go together. Now break the rules. But there was never that first step. It didn't seem to be.
And
I don't know. Maybe that's where we are in history. It's like, oh, the rules, they don't matter anymore. The rules.
No, I think we're, of course, because we're talking about 30 years ago.
So long ago.
I know. I think the rules are there.
Right.
I really think it just comes back to understanding, Jay Randall gave a great lecture one day about airplanes and why is the airplane window round? Why does the airplane window round? Why does the airplane look like it has to?
Right.
Like it does. And it's because it's got to serve a purpose. You can't, if you look at the evolution of cars, and this was, this is a 30-year-old thing, so don't hold me to it exactly.
No, that was his lecture. It was like the evolution of cars.
But you look at the evolution of cars. The first automobile car, the gasoline cars, looked like carriages.
Without horses.
Yeah, without horses.
Even the headlamps. They just kind of hung out in the front.
They just kind of hung out in the front.
Right.
And as, you start to understand, okay, well, this is different from a carriage. First off, we're going faster.
Right. Yeah, the headlights need to shine brighter.
The headlights need to shine brighter. You probably need to be fully enclosed. And, you look at the cars as it kind of evolves. You understand, that it was there to serve a purpose, and where an airplane, because it had to fly and it didn't have a precedent before. It did have some precedence, right? It did have birds.
But it was constrained by its speed and it had to fly. And staying in the air.
Yes.
So there were some constraints that you couldn't just get around by going, let's make this. I don't know, like the early airplanes, like some of them, the aluminum furniture that was wicker cover furniture.
Yes. Was that practical, or was that just
I think it was like keep it light.
Keep it light.
There was a lot of practical. The Zeppelins were amazing. There were terrible incidents involving Zeppelins, which probably led to their demise, and they weren't as fast. I think Zeppelins only cruised at like 80 miles an hour, or probably less.
Yes, it was less than that.
But you could cross the Atlantic in 3 days.
Yes.
But everything was a product of function in terms of weight restrictions.
Yes. The wicker chairs, you're right.
So we don't have as many restrictions in architecture school in terms of, like if assignments, were you ever given assignments that were restricted by time? Like, this is a 10-hour test. Do not spend 40 hours this weekend.
It's like if you need to spend, it was more like, your only restriction was how much sleep you needed to have.
Right.
That was the balancing act. It's like, okay, well, do I want to go to sleep tonight, or do I want to finish this project?
I've read that architecture schools are trying to introduce restrictions because it gets quite unhealthy in terms of the immediate health of the student by pulling all-nighters.
Yes.
And then the long-term life expectation of what the practice can do to you if you don't sleep well.
Yes.
Like, I would warn students, don't go to school if you're going to borrow a lot of money to do it. That's my thing. It's like an irrecoverable.
Yeah, you're starting yourself so far into debt that.
And UNCC, if you're an out-of-state student, that's $60,000 a year, and you can borrow the money, or your parents can pay it. But I mean, $60,000 a year for 5 years. If you just put that money away and invested it, would you have to do anything?
You wouldn't have to do anything, and realistically.
Or you could do a lot. You could, as you say, if you had that kind of money, go and study real estate, and then you've got a $300,000 war chest.
Yeah, or go get a business degree and then go work for an architecture firm.
Yeah, the constraints of having to do something because you borrowed money.
Yes. Yep.
Then you really are stuck.
Yes. Yeah.
So if you're borrowing money, I would tell any student, do the best, least expensive.
Yeah, go take an architecture technology degree, program at Central
Look, CPCC is a good program, and you can fold that into a 4-year or 5-year program now.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's 2 years out of the rest.
Yeah.
What about with regards to tools? AI is a buzzword now, but our students, I mean, they're going to be familiar with it.
They're going to be familiar with it.
From essay writing to But from a design tool, from an imagination tool, an ideation tool, where would you see the constraints? Where are the lanes?
The problem that I've had, I was actually trying to use this a couple of months ago on a project. The constraints, I think, are that you can't get repetitive, like particularly in generative AI, none of the programs I see give you something that you could repeat, right? Like you can set up and you can
the same text prompt.
The same text prompt is going to give you different. It's going to give you different things. I think where AI does help, and it's huge, is in the sort of business side of it. Correspondence. Every time I have to write an email, and I got like 3 things I need to say in the email, but I need to put some more fluff in it. Right. Generative AI,
You can't be too transactional in your communications.
Yeah.
You have to. There has to be some kind of introduction. You're easing into what might be a difficult email.
Yeah. How do I prompt this to say it more gently? Yeah. Those things. That is, where it really helps.
Are you using it for any design ideation?
We have used it for when we are trying to do theme boards or something where we're or vision boards where we're trying to create. We search around on the internet, we can't find the image that kind of describes what we want.
Right. So you just make it up.
So you just make it up, and it does a perfectly good job of putting that stuff together, giving us something there. It'll be interesting to see if it's useful in layout or
right.
Or
in the documentation.
In the documentation, if it can start to help lay out sheets for us.
But as far as students using it for ideation,
it's okay. It's just not going to
it's not going to finish it for you.
It's not going to finish it for you.
Do you know if they're using it at all?
I imagine they have to be.
If they're telling students don't use AI for this, it's like, okay, well, I could go to the library for 10 hours and try to find precedents.
No, I mean, in research, good Lord. AI and, we are using a little bit of it in code research, where there's one particular company that trains it on the code books.
Oh, right.
And, you can type it and ask a question, and it will bring all the code references for you. It's a hell of a lot easier than going through the index trying to figure out, what it is.
To try to find the bullet points.
It finds the bullet points so you can know where to start to look.
I used AI. Scott Wilson sent me an image of a project he was wrapping up, and I asked ChatGPT. I submitted the image and said, I want all the pros of this design to be voiced as Martha Stewart, and I want all the cons to be voiced as Steve Jobs.
Yeah.
And it was brutal. Martha was going on and on about how lovely the place settings were and the abundance of color and decor, and then Steve Jobs went, "This is so busy, I can't stand it. What were you thinking of?"
Right, exactly.
So the idea of using review personas, sort of critique personas before the critique.
Yeah, that's actually...
It'll give you interesting feedback. We get very emotionally attached to our designs, and then getting humiliated in front of your peers is horrible. Maybe taking photos and submitting them to ChatGPT.
Yes, asking it what it's missing, what, because I've done that with some of the business side of it. Like when I'm writing an agenda, I'll describe the project and I'll say, create an agenda for me.
Oh, okay.
A meeting agenda.
Yeah, your list. Everything starts as a list.
And it creates that list for me, and then it's like, okay, well, I don't need that, but I wouldn't have thought about including that. That's probably a topic we need to talk about. So, yeah.
You should have done this at UNCC, Henry.
Yes, I know.
You think they'll invite you back later?
Oh, yeah. I'm going to start doing crits and reviews there as well, so.
Yeah, but you need to come in at a high level, establish some credibility, and say, I studied architecture. And you work on projects.
Yeah, I work on projects.
But you should go back. You shouldn't, I know you don't have time. I think the format of it, we didn't spend a lot of time planning for this.
Yes, I know.
Other than trying to figure out how to get the camera to work.
Get the camera to work.
Right.
The thing is just trying to talk about myself. And that required me to think about myself and think about my career a little bit more. Where I think if it had been more of a conversation like we're having now, we've been, more done it.
Right.
Because that just requires a lot less preparation. So
yeah. Let me know when you do that, and
I will.
I'll sit in the back of the room and cast aspersions.
Yes, exactly.
I know him.
Exactly.
Thanks, Henry. Let's go have lunch, buddy.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you.
Bye.